Actually, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
um, so regarding the seven letters to the churches, I've always kind of wondered this, but I've never actually asked anyone or done any real searches. So it's my bad for not doing my own due diligence. But I've often heard that the promises to the overcomers are universal for every believer. And I want to understand how we come to that conclusion from the text. I'm not necessarily dismissing it. I just don't quite grasp how they're universal in application.
Mhm. That is a good question. Let me move. So I would say we use John's words to understand John. I had a conversation well, it was about a year ago at the Chafer conference. I grabbed everyone there and asked them how to interpret the overcomers. And everyone except for Arnold Fruchtenbaum said 1 John 5:4. Arnold Fruchtenbaum said everyone else here is wrong, it's out of context. So gotta love him
Yeah.
sticking up for what he believes. I really appreciate that. I don't see how it's out of context.
You said 1 John 5:4.
1 John 5:4. Whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world. There's two possible dates for the writing of 1 John, but both are before Revelation. It's either
Before
about
80, 90. Yeah.
it's either 66 AD or around 90 AD. I follow the 90 AD
Hmm.
date. So one way or another, he wrote this before he wrote the seven letters to the seven churches.
Hmm.
If he is writing about overcomers here and he's writing about overcomers there, but there's something different than just faith necessary to become an overcomer, it would be incumbent on him to explain that in that later letter, that
Hmm.
perhaps he was wrong back here, or it's a different context from back here.
Hmm.
Uh, my best research into the text is the similarities in language would be similar then to what he learned from Christ in the seven letters. And just as he got that vocab from Christ in the seven letters, he probably got this vocab from Christ in the second half of his earthly ministry as well. Faith is the overcoming that the believer does. It's overcoming the world of unfaith. 2 Corinthians 4:4. This is something done by the Spirit. The Spirit wrestling with our spirits uh, helps to take those blinders off that Satan has on those who belong to him through unbelief. So it's faith, coming to faith, that is the overcoming that the believer does. Anything else is a works salvation, especially since some of these promises do directly have to do with salvation. You
Hmm.
can't add a work to that without making it work salvation. For example, having your name written in the book of life permanently.
Hmm.
Uh, if you look here at Sardis, the things that they were told to do in order to receive that promise, their deeds are incomplete, wake up, strengthen what's dying. If that is what they need to do in order to receive this, then that's works salvation. My argument for the seven churches is there are a couple places that he is talking about rewards in those
Hmm.
promises. When he's talking about rewards, he makes that clear. For example, here in Thyatira, it's he overcomes, and he who keeps these deeds has authority over the nations. Now that's one of the promises for the uh, for I guess a believer who is progressing in his sanctification
Hmm.
is greater authority in the kingdom. That has to do with keeping deeds. For the one who overcomes, the one by faith, the rise of the morning star is something positive to look forward to, not something fearful to look forward to. That's the promise there to Thyatira. In Philadelphia, hold fast to keep a crown, not to become a permanent pillar in the temple, but to keep that reward.
Hmm.
And for Smyrna, remaining faithful to keep the crown of life. So when there is something that they are commanded to do in order to receive something else, it's never salvation. Where salvation is concerned, that's when the overcomer language happens, because the only overcoming we can do is through faith, because Jesus Christ does the work that is necessary to bring those things about. We're just told to
Mhm.
be faithful.
So you would say to look at it from excuse me, like a biblical, theological, or intertextual kind of manner.
Yeah, I'd say we'd still be sticking with biblical theology at that point. It'd be
Okay.
trying to understand John as more than just the author of Revelation, but the author of John's epistles, and
Like,
Revelation.
yeah.
He's going to use
Okay.
language the same way,
Right.
especially since he probably wrote all 5 of those books within
Short
5
order.
to 10
Yeah.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to be pretty similar and polished language.
Mhm. Remind me another time. Won't bring it up here, but I did like a visualization of the 7 letters. I'll have to send that to you to get your thoughts on that too. But
Okay.
I won't do it here.
Yeah, the 7 letters are pretty interesting. I think people
Mhm.
who go through Revelation usually spend a disproportionate amount of time in those 2 chapters. I know we did
Mhm.
in this study as well. Um, it is very interesting to go through and see what all is going on in these churches. Ephesus, of course, being John's home church, but also one of the more prominent ones in the region. Uh, and then 2 persecuted churches, Smyrna and Philadelphia. Some half-dead churches, Sardis and Laodicea. And then the interesting characters you meet in Thyatira and Pergamum. In fact,
Mhm.
we're going to look at Pergamum next week when we start to look at the woman who rides the beast, because some people draw
Okay.
some connections there. I
Hmm.
don't think they are valid connections, but there are similarities that are
Right.
prominent. Uh, in fact, Pergamum is probably the heritage for papal Rome as well.
Mm.
Um, Pergamum, that papal cult going through from Babylon to Pergamum to Rome itself with the Nimrod Tammuz cult,
Okay.
child cult, came through Pergamum.
Hmm.
At that time, that was the seat of that cult, and it moved to Papal Rome once Papal Rome was established 200 some years later.
Huh. Okay.
But when it's talking about the throne of Satan, or the place where Satan sits, in being in Pergamum, I think that's what it was talking about, was that spirit of Babylon. Now, I do take a literal view of Babylon in the
Mhm.
last times, but I do think Rome is going to be intimately tied up with that.
Yeah.
I'm I'm a bit more eclectic in my view of that. I do think it's literal Babylon, but I think the players on the ground are probably going to be more than just Babylon.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I'm in that camp as well.
Mhm. Walk through what we've done here in Revelation. I'm going
I
to skip
remember.
the. Oh, you go for it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess it wasn't so much a question as a, well, it was half question, half comment.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Dr. Greg Harris?
Here's what context would I have heard him in?
He used to be the head of the biblical exposition department at Master Seminary.
Okay.
He's had to retire since then because he's got like really bad rheumatoid arthritis, and so basically he can't do anything anymore. He can't like write or um, anyway. When he was there, he did a series through Revelation, and he did I think something like at least 8 to 10 sermons going through chapter 2 and 3. So that was super interesting.
Very cool. I'd like to take a look at that. Could you send me a link?
Sure, yeah, I'll work on that right now.
Thank you. My I think 5-year goal is to do Revelation for my church, so I'll be building on what I've already got here.
He he kind of did things in an interesting way. First, he taught them his congregation about how to understand covenants. I actually think you'd really like Dr. Harris. He's fantastic. and he sounds like a Foghorn Leghorn. He's just got like a super cool voice, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, he taught them about biblical covenants. He taught them how Israel should have been expecting the Messiah's appearance going throughout the whole scriptures. Then he did, I think, a series through Daniel, and then he did Revelation as kind of his magnum opus. And I think uh, there's well over 100 sermons in Revelation. But yeah, I'll find the link. I'll send it to you.
Okay, awesome. That sounds like how um, Grace Institute of Biblical Studies teaches their Revelation course. It's hung on the framework of like how Revelation is organized, but when you get somewhere like between chapters 3 and 4, they deal with the rapture there. When you get somewhere like I guess it's around that period too, after chapter 5, I think that's where they deal with um, Gog and Magog and answering those questions.
Huh. That's yeah.
Uh,
I like having that background supplementing what you're learning in the book itself.
yeah, yeah, it was a good study they did about a year ago. I've One of the things I've toyed around with here is when we get to the churches teaching about salvation, eternal security, and the difference between salvation and reward, because I do think that's important to understand. So I'd probably teach all 7 up front, and then I'd go in and do a little bit more in depth on each one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I get so frustrated when people look at books like Revelation or even Old Testament books and they just
Mhm.
skim through it as quickly as they possibly can, not realizing what they're missing.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd say with Revelation especially, you need to know your Old Testament better than just a cursory reading. Uh,
Yep.
Again, chapter 17, I think a lot of the issues in identifying the characters there could be resolved if we had a better understanding of the Old Testament and how the Hebrews used signs and symbols. Um, yeah, I think I said probably in our very first session with Revelation, it's Revelation is doing double duty on like 10 different things. One of those
Hmm.
things being it's an Old Testament book. It's an Old Testament book written in the New Testament, period. It's very much the character of apocalyptic literature, such as Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah. It fits with those in genre better than it fits anywhere in the New Testament. Even Matthew 24 has more New Testament flavor if you're understanding the context of the Gospels versus the epistles.
Hmm.
But Revelation is also the 5th gospel because the Gospels deal with Christ's earthly ministry, and Revelation is the culmination of his earthly ministry. Without Revelation, you don't have a conclusion to any of the Gospels, they just end.
Hmm.
And I think Mark is a good example of that. Mark, which has, I think it's 8 verses at the end that are not original to
Hmm.
Mark. I'm very convinced that they are not original. There's good textual evidence for that as well.
Yeah.
People keep that ending in because they say otherwise Mark ends too abruptly. That's not, to me, a good enough reason to keep an ending in there that didn't appear until 200 years after the other earliest records. And then there's some good evidence that someone added it in there. I think, of course, Mark ends abruptly. They all end abruptly
Hmm.
because we're still anticipating the return of Christ, the end of Christ, because the kingdom was in postponement. Like
Hmm.
what he came to do isn't yet finished.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
you need Revelation, the 5th gospel. So it weaves together all those loose ends of Scripture, and without it, Scripture is one knot of loose ends.
Hmm. I actually recently heard in a lecture from Abner Chow, he
Mhm.
was talking about it was, so for him, this was like a brief side comment to one of his students, but to me, I like had to pause it and I was like, whoa. But he was saying that he was asking him like, why do you guys think that the book of Mark ends so abruptly? And
Mhm.
then he had people asking him questions about, you know, the shorter or the medium ending and then the longer
Mhm.
ending, all that kind of stuff. And then he said, I actually he believes that it was meant to be that short ending where, you know, the people run off and they're afraid.
Mm.
And if I'm really
Left in
summarizing here,
confusion.
paraphrasing,
Yeah,
what's that?
left in confusion and darkness.
Yes, and so his rationale for that was that in Mark's gospel, it's often referred to as like the suffering servant,
Mhm.
where Christ is viewed as the suffering servant, and it ends with the servant is no longer suffering, and everyone else is about to be in terror because he's no longer suffering.
Okay.
So that for me, I was like, huh, that is pretty mind blowing. I got to look more into that, but I trust Dr. Chow, but